Welcome to Daddy's Podcast.
This is the Redefining Plastics Podcast. Welcome to the Redefining Plastics Podcast 2026. It seems crazy that we're already in 2026. I was thinking earlier this week as I got back into work and the grind that how far my career's come and how far the industry has come in just a couple of years. But when I was thinking through that, I started thinking about, well, it feels like the last 2 years was nothing. And then what is that going to mean for the next 2 years? And then I started thinking about, all right, what's happening in a couple of years? So conversations right now with a lot of customers within the plastics industry are really centered around EPR. I don't think that's making any kind of claims to anybody that they don't already understand. But California SB 54, it's looming out there and nobody knows what it means. Nobody understands exactly what it's going to look like. I don't even think Cal Recycle knows exactly what it's going to look like. And that goes into full effect January 1st, 2028, 2 years from now. And we don't even know what the plan is. We don't know what the regulations are going to look like. We know what the bill says, and we have a general understanding of the direction they're going to go. So I know we've talked on this podcast a couple times about SB 54. We're going to do it again because I think it's that important to talk about. And then I also think it's going to be really important for this show to do a lot more policy discussion in 26 than we did last year. I still want to focus on recycling and the people that are making it happen. And because I think the recycling part's a huge deal. But I also want to talk about design for recycle. I want to talk about design for sustainability. What are the differences there? I want to talk about the New York EPR bill that's being debated right now. How do we engage? How do we solve as the plastics industry as a whole? How do we work through these things? How do we solve and come to good solutions to these big topics and big issues? And I think right now there's not enough people that are talking about it. I think the industry groups are doing a good job of fighting these battles, but I don't think it's really filtering out beyond that to the rank and file. Let's put it that way. And I think that more people need to be involved in these discussions. So with all that said, we're going to start with SB 54 today. We're going to talk about what does the bill say? When is it enacted? And then what is the reality on the ground in California? What is it really going to look like in 2028 if the bill is enacted in the way that it's written right now? Regulations are going to have a big say on that, but there are stipulations within the bill, and we're going to walk through the actual language of the bill and how that's going to impact our businesses. And this isn't just plastics. This is all materials. If you read the bill as we get into it, it'll say that plastic-covered materials have to reach certain rates. But they're opening themselves up to big lawsuits if plastics are held to that standard, but no other materials are. So we'll show recycle rates based on Cal Recycle's own published data through a packaging dive article as we go forward. Yeah, this is going to be a little different today than what I normally do, but we're going to talk through actual language of a bill, which is what I do on a daily basis, but I'm sure not a lot of you are paying attention to that. But if you are paying attention to that, I think it's a good conversation to have. Those that ever wanted a peek into my world as somebody who does about 50% advocacy, 50% sales in my day job, here it is. This is California SB 54 in its entirety. I'm going to just scroll down to show you how wordy this thing is. And this thing is better than we'll call like UN charters. are possibly the most inane documents you will ever read. We find, we this, we that, and it's just half of it's thanking the group that gets together, and it's really painful. And you've got to sit there and you've got to really dig through these things, because a lot of those little pieces that you could look past end up biting you at the end. But what is SB 54 in essence? They tell us right here exactly what it is that they think. So you got the Council's Digest, which really is, you can call it an executive summary. But this executive summary points out that too much plastic's getting into the environment, and they want to get to 65% of plastic covered material. And it's very important where you see plastic. They're not talking about getting to 65% recycle rates for everything. They're just talking plastics. So this whole focus isn't really EPR or extended producer responsibility. This is a plastics ban bill in essence. It's very clear as you get through the language. And so I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to start talking about where it's really going to impact the industry, the plastics industry as a whole. And the big thing that I wanted to point out is that there are rates and dates in this bill. In other EPR bills, they're not specific on that. So the Oregon bill, Colorado, Minnesota, Maryland, they don't specify this material has to have this recycle rate by this date or it is not allowed. California does. The New York bill takes it a step further, and it's even more difficult to meet these goals. And it's very clear when you read through the language of these bills that the people that are putting this together are well-intentioned, but they have no clue how recycling actually works. And they are trying to put laws together that will supposedly improve the system. But what it actually does is it really slows down progress, because it's very limiting. It really makes it so you have to do things a certain way and innovation dies. So I want to focus specifically on Article 2, subpoint C here, where it says that we need to ensure that all plastic covered materials offered for sale, distributed, or imported into the state achieves the following recycling rates. Once again, all plastic covered materials, not all covered materials, because there are a lot more covered material categories, and we'll go into the covered material categories here in a second. But all plastic covered material categories have to reach not less than 30% of the covered material within that category. So covered material, as we'll get into the actual list here in a second, the covered material category is packaging format plus material substrate. So PET water bottles or jugs, HDPE blow molded bottles, craft paper, like sandwich wraps, things like that. And we'll show you the list, and we'll talk through the list here in a second. But it's saying that covered material category has to show a 30% recycle rate by January 1st, 2028. So we're talking 2 years out. Then the question becomes, how many of our categories in the state of California actually hit that? And the answer, according to the own numbers from CalRecycle, so this is a Packaging Dive article that I just jumped to that shows the CalRecycle. So CalRecycle is the governing body that manages waste and recycling in California. It's like a DEQ would be in any other state. So Department of Environmental Quality manages the EPR bill in Oregon, and it also manages the EPR bill in Colorado, Maryland. But in California, there's a specific government entity called CalRecycle that manages that. So CalRecycle's numbers, and once again, these are estimated recycle rates. And what I'm showing on the screen, if you're watching this, is from a Packaging Dive article. Packaging Dive is actually a really good publication for things not just recycling related, but any kind of packaging. And packaging is a big deal for the plastics industry, but it's a big deal for the paper industry. And they're pretty agnostic when it comes to material substrates. They're just talking about packaging. So, how much, as of December 31st, 2025, does CalRecycle estimate is being recycled in their state? PET, number one, bottles, jugs, and jars. That's one of the covered material categories. We'll show them all here in a second. 16% is what they think. I don't know why bottles, jugs, and jars are in one category when really it should be PET bottles and then PET jugs, PET jars. The way these covered material categories were put together, it doesn't seem to be a lot of rhyme and reason to it, other than to make it more difficult for plastics to hit rates. So PET bottles, if you look at the recycle rates from the industry and what the industry shows, it's around 31% in the US. California is a bright spot for the most part when it comes to recycling. So you would assume that PET bottle recycling in California is even higher than 31%. I don't know that. I don't have those numbers. I know NAPCOR does a lot of work in that space, and there are other people that do as well. 16% for PET bottles, though. It starts off in a way that it's not going to work. You're not going to get from 16 to 30% in 2 years. I've been doing this too long to know how long it takes to improve actual recycle rates. You can improve access rates, the amount of people that have the ability to recycle, way, way faster than you can actual recycling rates, because you need the infrastructure and you need a lot of things to go right in order to improve those numbers. And it's a small incremental change. So in essence, if you put California SB 54's bill, the language itself, up against their estimates, PET bottles will be banned in the state of California in 2028. If the bill is enacted exactly how it's written, the regulations are written the exact way that the bill is written. HDPE, other rigids, I don't even know what the heck we're talking about here. Other rigids. What are other rigids? Literally everything else? How does other rigids have less than 23% recycled, but HDPE bottles, which would be your blow molded bottles, so your Tide Pods come in those big jugs that have all your different Tide Pods in it. That is an HDPE bottle, blow molded bottle. And they're saying that's at 19%. Or milk jugs. I think that number's low. This other rigid, since I don't even really know what it is, I think that probably is artificially high. The one thing I've noticed in working with California is their estimates usually are based on what's called waste characterization study. So you hire a group to come in, they'll actually go out to the landfills and to the MRFs, and then they will spot check and they'll figure out the percentage of HDPE bottles, the percentage of PET bottles that are going into each of these facilities, and not just that, all waste. And then they'll extrapolate that data, and then they'll figure out, if you look at it throughout the entire state, that's what is going into the landfill. I'm not entirely sure who California used for their waste characterization study, but I see a lot of flaws in it. I see a lot of numbers that don't make a lot of sense. When you look at the real world and what's going on, there's a lot of disconnect between the data and what we're actually seeing. So when you look at that and you're estimating a recycle rate based on what you think you know is going into a landfill, and then you look at what's being recycled in the state, as in what data is getting back to you that's being recycled in the state. And that's where they come up with these numbers. There are a couple things that we have to flag here. This is only considering what goes through a MRF, curbside recycling. I've talked about this on the show before, but there is less than 10% of all recycling that happens in the U.S. goes to curbside. Most of post-consumer recycling is B2B. So let's say I get a pallet of boxes shipped into my facility. I take the pallet wrap off, which is going to be a linear low density film that's used to hold that pallet together, and I collect that and then send that to a company like Revolution or Envision, who then takes that and makes that back into a polyethylene pellet. That's post-consumer in the way the FTC looks at it. Most people would consider that post-commercial, but you would still say it's PCR in just normal language that people use. So that is a post-consumer, post-commercial material. The issue is the state of California has no way of tracking that. They don't know what's happening outside of the MRFs. And the MRFs, the reason why they know is because it's municipal. It's a municipal recovery facility. Some of them are privately held, but they're based on county charters, things like that. And there's data that filters back. And that's the data that filters back to CalRecycle. So all of these numbers are based on just what happens that goes to a MRF. It does not consider drop-off locations. It does not consider anything else, only material that goes to a MRF. And like I said, less than 10% of all recycling in the U.S. that happens goes to curbside. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but mostly due to cost, long supply chain, logistics make it very difficult to recycle anything curbside. And the fact that it's single stream, everything gets contaminated, paper gets contaminated, cardboard gets contaminated, plastics get contaminated, everything does. If you put a battery in your recycling, it could catch on fire. So loads are thrown out because you put an electronic in your recycling. So there are a lot of things here that we have to be paying attention to. But as you scroll through and you look at the list, there's not a single covered material category that CalRecycle thinks has a recycle rate above 30%. They do show glass bottles and jars at 65%. I would love to talk to anybody in the industry that's being honest that believes glass bottles are recycled at 65%. The amount of energy and the damage and loss and everything that happens in recycling at a MRF, a lot of MRFs don't accept glass because it's heavy, it costs a lot to move, and it costs a lot to recycle. Energy and dollars. I think that number is entirely overinflated unless you factor in all the stuff that's going into aggregate or concrete or asphalt. And why is it that glass can be considered that way, but if I take a water bottle or a HDPE jug and I make it into a park bench, we can't count that? Why the double standard there? So these are the things we're talking about. Aluminum foil, less than 9%. They say aluminum aerosol cans, over 39%. That's probably pretty close. It's somewhere in the 30s, I would say. Soup cans. Other ferrous metals at 25%. That's probably pretty close. Paperboard at 30%. Less than 6% paperboard with plastic coating. Paperboard with plastic coating, you can recycle that. And a lot of people do recycle that. So I'm not entirely sure where they're getting that number. OCC, or old corrugated containers, otherwise known as cardboard, 68%, probably pretty accurate. Craft paper less than 30%. Molded fiber, that's an interesting one because everybody's looking at molded fiber as this panacea, as something that's going to solve for waste. You can't really compost it unless you have an industrial composter that's very specific that can handle this material. But for the most part, industrial composters don't want packaging. They want food scraps, specifically veggies and fruits and things like that. So molded fiber is only recycled at a 7% rate. It's short fibers, so it's very difficult to make that back into anything other than really low-grade paper. And then you've got cartons at less than 1%. I've seen a lot of bashing on the Carton Council lately, so I don't need to drag them through the mud again. The water cartons that I see that say reduction in plastic, there's a ton of plastic in those things. And it's much worse than just a PET water bottle. Let's be honest with ourselves here. So all of this to say, California SB 54 says that we have to have a covered material category show 30% recycle rate by 2028. And there's not a single one that California thinks hits it today. What are they going to do? Are they going to enact the bill in the way that it says? Are they going to say that if you're not at 30%, you cannot sell, offer for sale, import, or distribute in the state? Every single pouch, every single flexible film, every single PET water bottle, HDPE jug. So what do we, just all paper, all glass, all metal? Is that the best thing for the state of California? It's going to make things a lot more expensive, which is why Governor Newsom, when they gave him the first estimates on what the costs were, he said, no, we are not doing that. I'm running for president in 2 years. I can't have this thing hanging around my neck with the amount of cost increase. And that's the biggest thing that I run into when I'm talking to any kind of packaging company, brands. They're very confused as to what California SB 54 really means. And I don't blame them because nobody really knows what's going on. Nothing is set yet. And this thing is supposed to be active in 2 years. So people are supposed to be changing their entire supply chains right now for a bill that's not even settled yet. Because it's going to take years for some of these companies to make changes. Because you got to get new tooling if you're a packaging company. If you move from one polymer to another, you've got to change all your tools because you're going to have different cycle times. You're going to have different temperatures that you're going to have to run these plastics at. You're going to have different shrink rates. So you're going to have it dwell a little bit longer. Let's say you go from a polystyrene to a polypropylene. You're going to have a shrinkage if you don't let it sit in the press. So you have to change all your tools to accommodate. And that's hundreds of millions of dollars in some cases for big companies. So you're asking these companies to make changes when they don't even have a clear direction on what the bill is going to be. These are the things that legislators don't think through. And in California, it's very difficult because they're not as industry friendly when it comes to having these conversations. And I get where they're coming from. They want to make the world a better place. And in their mind, this is what they're doing. But really what they're doing is causing chaos. And they're going to cause a lot of increase in costs. There's a ton of regulation and red tape that goes into this. And it's already tough to do business in California. It's going to be even harder after this thing happens. And I know some of my detractors will be watching this and saying, well, you just hate it because it's against plastics. It's not good for anybody. This isn't good for paper. This isn't good for, because just the regulatory compliance, you're going to have whole people that you have to hire to specifically track this. And that's bad for any industry. I don't care who you are. But so we got to be at 30%. Covered material categories. Let's look at the covered material categories. These are the covered material categories. And they have listed on here, is it recyclable? Is it not? Who knows where the heck they get that from? But I think this is based on their percentages that we just saw. So yeah, they're saying 65% for glass, all of these things. I don't know where they're getting that, but okay. Ceramics, 0%. There's not a lot of ceramic packaging. Aluminum, they've got all these blanket rates that are just guesses and estimates. What's going to be interesting is lawsuits in the state of California on this there are going to be a lot of them. Let's just be upfront about that. There's going to be a lot of lawsuits on this. The first year of this, there are going to be a lot of people challenging companies selling products into the state. Let's say you are selling a PET thermoform for salads at a grocery store. You're going to it's going to be on you to know that you are covered and that you have a 30% recycle rate for those PET thermoforms. And as we just saw, PET thermoforms on there were listed somewhere under 10%. So you're going to have to go and do the research, or your trade groups are going to have to go do the research to figure out what that actual percentage is. And then you're going to have to present that to the state of California and Cal Recycle and say, this is what my recycle rate actually is. And you're going to have to be very confident in whatever those numbers are, because the first year, you're going to have a lot of these different environmental groups that are going to be suing people saying, you're selling a product into the state that doesn't meet the statutory requirements of SB 54. And I think everybody in this industry needs to understand that. That is a real concern, that if you are going to sell a product, you have to own the data. You have to be confident. You can't take other people's words for it. You can't say, well, California says it's this, and that's what it is. You have to do the work, and you have to be confident, because somebody is going to sue a big company saying you're selling things into this state that don't meet California SB 54 requirements. So if you're going to move from one product to another, you better be sure that your covered material category that you're moving into hits 30% by 2028, which I think we've already established. There aren't going to be a single plastic that's going to meet that based on California's estimates. And the other complication here is you have to show that over a 3-year period, 65% of your product is recycled if you want to use data outside of the MRF system. So if you want to say a drop-off location, why is that? That doesn't make any sense. Like, why 65% versus 30%? Are we trying to prioritize curbside? Curbside is an inefficient system. It's actually a really bad system. I've gone on the record many times saying single stream curbside is a horrible idea, and we shouldn't be doing it. We should be separating. But that's not the way that we established our system, and getting people to actually engage in the system. 43% of Americans actually recycle, that have access to recycle. How are we going to get more people to separate, like source separate? It's just not going to happen, because Americans are lazy. We like simple. And so if we're going to say that, let's say EPS transport packaging, something I'm very familiar with, has a very high recycle rate. It's over 30% recycle rate. For any kind of packaging material category or covered material category, that's high. And it's probably the highest in plastics. But that's all distribution centers. None of it goes through a MRF for the most part. There are a couple smaller MRFs that do this, and they do it well, and they accept EPS in your bin, or what people would call styrofoam. But if California SB 54 is to be believed, you have to show you have a 65% recycle rate in your category if it's not going through a MRF. Doesn't make a ton of sense. So these are the things that we've got to figure out. Like how do we engage with this? How do we comply as an industry? Like I came out of the packaging industry. This is a nightmare trying to figure out what it is we're going to do. And there's no clarity at all on what's actually going to happen, because I cannot see a world in which California actually bans all plastics that don't have a 30% recycle rate through a MRF, because that's what we're talking about here. If so, every single package in the state of California will not be made out of plastic, which means you're going to have more emissions. You're going to have more waste. It's going to be heavier products, because only 43% of Americans are recycling. That just means more material to a landfill. I don't think anybody's talking about that. And it's not like people litter plastics at a higher rate than other materials. People litter whatever they got. They got paper, they're going to throw that into the environment. They've got molded fiber, they're going to throw that into the environment. It's going to take a while to break down. There's going to be metal. The amount of cans that I see rolling around streets, that's not going to break down quickly. It's going to get into the environment. That's just more and more and more waste into the environment. Is this what we want, California? Is this truly what we want? Did we think through any of this? And these are the things that I want to talk to people about. It's like truly understanding unintended consequences when you put a bill like this together. I think an extended producer responsibility bill is huge. It's important. It's something that needs to happen. But it needs to be done in a way that's logical, that actually understands the percentages that we just talked about. It understands what the baseline is before you put requirements together. Right now, we don't have that. Right now, we have people putting bills together in the same way that brands came out and said, we're going to be at 25% recycle rate by 2025 or 20% post-consumer recycle. And they were at like 5% when they said that. And then they started digging into it and they realized there's not enough PCR that's food grade available for me to even do it. This is the same logic. It's knee-jerk reaction. It's not understanding the realities on the ground. And it's people making decisions and making very important decisions for entire industries that don't engage with industry. I know a lot of people that don't agree with me will be listening to this and say, yeah, you can't trust industry. Industry lies. Industry's out for its own good. Okay. But if you don't listen to industry at all, you're going to have the complete failure of a bill that could have been successful. There could be a quality EPR system in California that really expands recycling rates and access for material, and then demand. I haven't even mentioned demand yet, because EPRs right now are solving for the wrong side of the equation. They're solving for everything other than what they need to be solving for. And what they need to be solving for is people have to buy this stuff. I don't care how much you collect, somebody on the back end has to buy it. And if you don't incentivize that, it's not going to happen, because brands are going to go to the cheapest possible option, specifically in an economic environment like we're in right now. So there's a lot going on here, and there's a lot left to be determined. So what do we do? Like, where do we go? So California SB 54 is here. It is law. It is the law of the land in the state of California. I really don't know what it's going to look like. And I don't think anybody knows really what it's going to look like in its final form. So as an industry, or let's just talk about packaging companies right now, or a brand. If you're a brand, do you just wait for the regulations, or do you start investing today to make changes? Like we just showed, none of the plastic covered materials categories have a recycle rate above 30%. So why would you move from one polymer to another? Invest hundreds of millions of dollars in that. Because if Cal Recycle is really going to enforce this the way that it's written, you should be moving to glass or aluminum. So what do? You engage. You talk to Cal Recycle. Cal Recycle has constant meetings on this with CAA, which is the pro that's working with Cal Recycle to manage it. You have to get involved. You have to talk to Cal Recycle. You have to talk to your legislators if you're in the state of California. And you have to tell them the reality of what's going on here and the costs that would be implied with moving from what you're doing today to what you're going to do and how that would be passed on to consumers. And it's not a fear tactic. It's just, this is reality. When you put rates and dates like this with any kind of an EPR bill, you, in essence, make it into a ban bill. And whenever you ban products and you limit the options that you have and you limit the competitive environment, things are going to be more expensive. That's just simple capitalism. So we need to really engage with California, with Cal Recycle, with industry groups to push back against all of the portions of this bill that are ill-conceived, which there are a lot. But there are also some really positive things that are happening because of SB 54. There are conversations happening at brands now because California is such a big economy unto itself. It is causing people to have conversations about recycle rates and about recycling in a way that's never happened before. And I know that the plastics industry gets bashed a lot because people talk about plastic recycling as a panacea for all waste. And I, for one, do not believe that. I do not think that we're going to recycle our way out of wasteful behaviors. I think there's a lot that needs to happen. When you look at the hierarchy of sustainability, or the 3 R's, you reduce, you reuse, and then you recycle. So we still need to reduce the amount of packaging that we use. I'll say it again. I don't care if everybody in the plastics industry is pissed off at me for saying that. We need to reduce the amount of packaging that we use. We need to recycle more because it is a finite resource. At least the feedstocks that we're using to make plastics is a finite resource. If you're in Asia or the Middle East and you're using crude oil or naphtha to make any kind of plastics, there's only so much crude oil going around. If you're in North America and you're using natural gas, there's only so much natural gas. So we need to reuse what we've got, and we need to find a way to make it economically viable. And we need to increase recycling in the US, and EPR is a great way to do that. But when we put these rates and dates in there, we create such a monster of a bill that it buckles under its own weight. Because if you look at California SB 54, this is not EPR to me. And I think to most people in the industry, in the plastics industry, in the packaging industry, they would agree. This is a ban bill masquerading as EPR. This is a way for people to reduce plastics. And if that's what you wanted to do, why didn't you just make the bill that and then separate them and then have EPR be its own separate bill so it's not this monster that's going to buckle under its own weight? It's because you don't get a bill passed in any state that's going to ban that amount of choice. I don't care if it's a completely blue state or a red state. So you've got to find a way to slide these things in there. And that's exactly what they did. And so until we solve for the demand side for EPR, I think EPR is going to be a good idea. And it may not get the results that we truly want. I think as an industry, we have to stop pushing back against the idea of EPR. If anybody in the plastics industry is saying we don't need or don't want EPR, that is an unserious conversation to be having, and we need to stop that. We need to engage with the process, and we need to be open to working through and solving these roadblocks, because we have to be honest with ourselves and with the industry. People look at our products as a blight on society, and they're not. But it's because we've been giving lip service as an industry for years, saying, yes, we care about recycling, but then not actually doing it. So we have to actually do it, or we have to shut up about it. And that's my opinion, but it's a well-held opinion in my mind. It would take a lot to walk me off that point. That in the same way that I've challenged brands in the past, saying, don't say you care about recycling when really what you care about is the lowest cost in marketing. Recycling and sustainability cannot be just marketing. It has to be reality. It has to be something you truly believe in. If it's not, stop talking about it. So we're in a weird spot right now. We don't really know what SB 54 is going to be. We know that it doesn't look good for plastics as a whole in the way that it's written. Regulations are going to have a huge impact on that, but regulations aren't set yet. So in my mind, if you're a packaging company or you're a brand, you have to wait. You can't make decisions right now. And I know that it's going to put you behind the eight ball if you do end up having to move from one polymer to another or polymers to glass, because that is a huge change. If you went from polymers to glass packaging for any kind of food product, that is a completely different supply chain. That's different production facilities. That's a lot of change. So I understand why people are moving now, but if you move now, you may move and then have to move again. So I would preach patience and engagement. You have to be in this fight. And fight's probably a strong word. You have to be in the conversation. You have to be in the discussion. If you're not in the discussion, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So let's get involved. Let's work with legislators. Let's help them understand what this truly means to cost, to just the packaging industry in the state of California, and hope that cooler heads prevail and that we end up in a place that is feasible and actually improves the system. With all of that, that's what I've got on California SB 54. I'll keep updating this as more information comes out, but I think high level, plastics are not looking great for packaging in the state of California with the way this bill is written, intentionally. A lot remains to be seen. So let's be patient, but let's engage. For Redefining Plastics, this is Justin Riney. I hope you all have a great night. If you want to learn more about the plastics industry, recycling, check out these other videos.
Please like and subscribe.